My name is Lauren Mitchell, and this morning the world tilted beneath my feet. The first hint was the vibration of my phone against the oak desk, so sharp it rattled my coffee mug. Steam curled above the dark roast, already cooling while the pale November sun spilled across the wide glass of my corner office window. I'd been polishing a pitch deck for a client in Seattle, my silk blouse catching the light like a quiet promise. Life, at least until 8:17 a.m., felt steady. Then the message blinked onto the screen. The county recorder has finalized the sale. Your cousin, Matthew, is now the legal owner. For a heartbeat, I didn't breathe. My thumb hovered, the faint tremor betraying the steadiness I'd trained into every boardroom gesture. 10 years of checks, every property tax payment made on time, every receipt neatly filed in the blue folder I kept locked in my bottom drawer. 10 years of believing that the stretch of wild Carolina meadow my grandmother once called our forever view would remain the one piece of family earth tethered to me.
Sold.
For $100. The coffee tasted suddenly metallic, the silk against my collarbone rough as burlap. I swallowed hard and stared past the skyline, beyond the gray winter clouds. If my parents thought this would break me or silence me, they'd forgotten who taught me to fight for what can't be priced. I was 22 the first time I walked that land alone. Early May, the air thick with honeysuckle and the soft crackle of cicadas. My grandmother's old farmhouse sat just beyond the split-rail fence, its white paint peeling in long curls like forgotten ribbons. Grandma Rose had died the winter before, and with her went the only voice in my family who believed I could build a life on my own terms. While my parents busied themselves with the logistics of estate paperwork, I lingered in the meadow, the grass brushing my bare calves. I remember holding the brass locket she left me, inside, a tiny pressed violet and a scrap of her looping handwriting. Root yourself in what matters. That day, I promised her and myself that I'd keep the land alive. But when I announced that I'd be paying the annual taxes to secure the deed for the long haul, my father laughed. Not a cruel laugh, but sharp enough to sting. "Lauren, you'll barely pay your own rent," he said, resting his calloused hands on the kitchen counter. "Leave the heavy lifting to people who can afford it." My mother only offered a thin smile, the kind that avoided conflict by ignoring it. My cousin Matthew, standing behind her, tilted his head with that slow grin of his, the one that always felt like a dare. "You? 10 years," he chuckled. "You'll give up before next spring." The lump in my throat swelled until I could barely speak. My palms slicked with sweat. I forced the words out anyway. "I'm paying them. Every year. No matter what." I remember the silence after that, how the old clock in the hall ticked louder, how the scent of lemon polish from the wooden cabinets turned suddenly sharp. That night, I wrote the first check. My hands shook so badly I had to steady the pen against the edge of the table. But when the envelope slid into the blue mailbox on the corner of Main Street, a strange calm settled in my chest. It wasn't about the acreage alone. It was the principle. Grandma Rose had believed in me when no one else did. The land was proof that her faith hadn't been misplaced. I tucked the locket back against my collarbone, the pressed violet cool against my skin. That tiny flower became my silent vow. I would stand, whether anyone believed I could or not. After that first tax payment, life unfolded like a long uphill trail, steeper than I'd expected, but lined with moments that glittered when the light hit just right. I left North Carolina for Boston with a single suitcase and Grandma Rose's locket tucked under my collar. My parents assumed I'd be back in a year, broke and homesick. Instead, I took a receptionist job at a small architectural firm, answering phones and ferrying coffee while memorizing the designs pinned to the conference room wall. During lunch breaks, I'd sit with Architectural Digest issues rescued from the recycling bin, sketching details of vaulted ceilings and cantilevered decks. One evening, when the office had emptied and the cleaning crew rattled vacuums down the hall, the firm's senior partner, Marion Holt, found me hunched over a pile of tracing paper. "You've got a good eye," she said, sliding into the chair beside me. Her gray-streaked hair framed a face equal parts sharp and kind. I flushed, embarrassed, but She studied my pencil lines with the quiet concentration of someone reading a familiar language. Ever thought about design school? I had, of course. I just hadn't believed it was allowed. Marian became more than a mentor. She was the first person since Grandma Rose who looked at me and saw potential, not limitation. She encouraged me to apply for evening classes at the Boston Architectural College. It wasn't easy. I worked full-time, studied at night, and on weekends drafted projects in a cramped apartment that smelled of radiator heat and ambition. There were nights when fatigue wrapped around me like a wet blanket, when the numbers in my bank account shrank to the size of my courage. Still, each spring I mailed another tax check home, quiet proof that I could honor my promise and fund my dreams simultaneously. My parents never asked how I managed. I never volunteered. By 30, I'd earned my license and landed my first solo commission, a lakeside retreat for a tech entrepreneur who wanted something that feels like it's always been there. I poured my soul into it, wood and stone and glass framing the water like a living painting. When the project made the cover of a regional magazine, Marian left a single voicemail. "You've arrived, kiddo." I didn't post about it on social media. I didn't call home. Over the next few years, success came in steady waves. A second office in Portland, a small team that felt like family, a reputation for designs that married sustainability with quiet elegance. Clients called me the whisperer of landscapes. I kept my personal life private. The land back home, an unspoken heartbeat beneath every blueprint. Each December, when the property tax bill arrived, I opened the envelope with the same small thrill, a private ceremony. Check signed. Locket kissed. Envelope mailed. It wasn't vanity or nostalgia. It was proof that a young woman dismissed in her own kitchen could outgrow the limits her family tried to draw around her. And through it all, my success stayed hidden. To my parents, I was simply doing well up north, nothing more. They never suspected how far I'd climbed. 2 weeks after the county's message, I invited my parents and Matthew to Boston. The email was short, no explanations, just a warm but firm note. Come for brunch. Sunday, 11 a.m. I'd like to talk face to face. When they arrived, the November wind tugged at their coats. I opened the heavy walnut door and stepped aside as they entered the converted loft that doubled as my home and design studio. My mother paused first. The sunlight from the clear-story windows spilled across the polished concrete floors, catching the coppery flecks in the reclaimed wood beams. A trio of my own architectural models sat on a floating shelf, miniature homes of glass and stone. Dad's gaze roamed to the wall of framed magazine covers. Northwest Modernist. New England Living. Each bore my name in bold serif letters. Matthew's eyebrows shot up, but he said nothing. I let the silence stretch, the hum of the radiant heat and the faint hiss of the espresso machine filling the room. My pulse thudded in my ears, but my voice, when it came, was steady. Coffee? Or something stronger? Mom shook her head, eyes still scanning the loft. You've done well, Dad managed, clearing his throat. I smiled, the kind that hides both pride and pain. Better than well. I own this building. And the one next door. We're expanding the firm next spring. Matthew finally spoke. This is all yours? Every square inch. I set 3 mugs on the live-edge table and slid into a chair. And until this morning, I thought the family land was still partly mine too. Dad shifted uncomfortably. Lauren, it was just business. I finished. Selling the land I've paid taxes on for 10 years to Matthew for $100? Matthew's face colored. It wasn't my idea. But you didn't say no. I held his gaze until he looked down. Mom reached for my hand, then hesitated. We didn't think you'd care. You've been gone so long and what? I leaned forward. Because I left, you assumed I'd stopped belonging? The locket at my throat felt cool and solid, a small anchor. Dad rubbed the back of his neck. We needed quick cash. We figured Matthew could keep it in the family. I let a beat of silence linger, the kind that makes people see themselves clearly. Then I slid a folder across the table, property deeds, stamped and notarized. I've purchased the adjoining parcels over the past 5 years, I said quietly. 50 acres that wrap around the meadow. Every road in and out runs through my land. Without an easement from me, no one can develop or even access that field legally. Matthew's jaw dropped. I continued, voice smooth as the espresso's crema. I don't need to fight for what's already protected. I just wanted you to see who I've become while you weren't looking. The room went still. My mother's eyes glistened. Dad stared at the floor as though the grain of the wood might rewrite the last decade. I never stopped being part of this family, I said, softer now. But I built a life that no one can sell for $100. Matthew swallowed hard. Lauren, I didn't realize. I know, I said. And now you do. The hum of the espresso machine seemed louder, a quiet applause beneath the stunned silence. The quiet stretched until it felt like a living thing between us. Outside, a late autumn gust rattled the big loft windows, scattering the last brittle leaves across the skylight. I drew a slow breath and wrapped my fingers around the warm coffee mug. I'm not here to punish anyone, I said, letting the words settle. But things can't keep going the way they always have. If we're going to have a relationship, if this family is going to mean something, there have to be changes. Mom's chin trembled. Changes? Yes. I set the mug down and met each of their eyes. First, the land. I'm not contesting the sale. You signed the papers, it's legal. But Matthew, if you want to keep it, you'll sign a conservation agreement with me. That meadow stays wild. No subdivisions, no quick resale. Grandma Rose wanted it to breathe, not to be paved over. That's non-negotiable. Matthew's mouth opened, closed, then he nodded. I can do that. Second, I continued, my voice steady but not unkind. You both have to be honest with me. No more decisions behind my back. If you're struggling, say so. If you need help, ask. But the secrecy ends today. Dad shifted, the weight of his regret heavy in his shoulders. You're right, he said quietly. We should have come to you. And last, I said softer now, we have to start seeing each other as equals. Not the little girl who left, not the parents who know better. Equals. That means respect. Every direction. For a moment, no one moved. Then Mom reached across the table, her cool fingers wrapping around mine. I can do that, she whispered. Dad's voice followed, rough but certain. Me too. Something in my chest, 10 years of tight, invisible knots, loosened. I turned to Matthew. And you? He looked straight at me, guilt flickering behind his eyes. You have my word about the meadow. And I'll earn back your trust. I nodded, the locket at my throat catching a shaft of winter light. Then we start fresh. But understand, my boundaries aren't a threat. They're a promise. I'll protect what matters, whether anyone approves or not. The words hung there, not sharp but undeniable. Outside, the wind eased. The silence in the loft no longer felt heavy. It felt like breathing space, wide enough for all of us to begin again. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the loft in long, honeyed stripes. For the first time in years, I woke without the familiar ache in my chest, a quiet proof that something fundamental had shifted. While the city yawned awake outside, I brewed coffee and stood at the drafting table that had carried me through late-night sketches and early morning deadlines. The locket rested against my skin, a small cool weight that pulsed with memory. My phone buzzed with a message from Matthew. Draft of the conservation agreement attached. I'll sign today. Thanks for giving me the chance to fix this. A second message arrived minutes later from Dad. You were right. We should have trusted you. Mom, and I want to visit again. This time to listen. I smiled, a slow warmth spreading through me. It wasn't an apology wrapped in grand gestures. It was something better, a beginning. Later that week, I received a package in the mail, my grandmother's handwriting across the envelope, carefully saved all these years by my mother. Inside was a folded piece of faded stationery and a small violet pressed between 2 sheets of wax paper. Root yourself in what matters. The note read, the same words etched inside the locket. I closed my eyes, the scent of old paper mingling with the earthy aroma of fresh coffee. My grandmother's voice seemed to whisper through the quiet, not a command, but a blessing. I thought of the meadow back home, the way summer light would shimmer on the tall grass, the cicadas singing dusk into evening. No one could buy that kind of belonging. It wasn't measured in dollars or deeds. When I finally opened my eyes, the city's skyline glowed like a field of steel and glass violets. I was no longer the young woman begging for recognition. I was the architect of my own life, the keeper of promises no contract could diminish. I touched the locket once more, the pressed violet cool against my fingertips, and whispered into the quiet loft, half prayer, half declaration. They sold what they thought was my future for $100. But I've built a life no one can ever price.